I thought I was surprising my husband on his birthday. But what I found at that cabin destroyed everything I believed. That single sentence has replayed in my head more times than I can count. Even now, months later, the echo of that night in the woods still finds its way into my quietest hours, when the rain taps against the window, or when I catch the scent of pine and smoke. It all comes rushing back, that exact moment when I realized the man I loved wasn't who I thought he was. It was supposed to be a surprise, a sweet, simple gesture. I woke up before dawn, sunlight barely spilling through the curtains, and decided that instead of waiting at home, I'd drive out to the cabin where Evan and his friends were supposedly fishing. I told myself it was romantic, even cute, bringing homemade food to celebrate his birthday. I didn't tell him, of course. I wanted to see his face light up when he saw me standing there with the basket in my hands. The air in Duluth was sharp that morning, late October. The kind of cold that seeps through your sweater but smells clean, like the start of winter. I packed his favorite things: apple pie, roasted chicken, a thermos of coffee, and a handwritten note that simply said, "Happy birthday, love. You are my calm." It felt good doing something thoughtful. Like maybe I could bring us back to the way things used to be, before he grew distant. Before he started spending every other weekend, camping with the guys. I didn't let myself think about how long it had been since we laughed together. Or how I'd started sleeping closer to my side of the bed. The drive took 3 hours. The road wound through the forest, the trees stretching tall and quiet like sentinels. Fallen leaves scattered beneath my tires, crunching like faint whispers. For the first 2 hours, all I could think about was his smile, his laugh, the way he used to look at me like I was the only person in the room. But as I got closer, something shifted. The road turned narrower, the trees grew denser, and the silence became heavy. My heart started racing, not from excitement but from a strange unease. Maybe it was just nerves, I told myself. Maybe I was worried for nothing. Still, a small voice inside whispered, "What if he doesn't want you there?" When I finally pulled into the clearing, I saw the cabin, small, wooden, surrounded by trees dusted with early frost. But what caught my eye weren't the trees or the mist curling along the ground. It was the cars. 4 of them, parked haphazardly near the cabin, and one I didn't recognize. A sleek, red convertible. Definitely not something that belonged to Evan or his middle-aged fishing buddies. My hands froze on the steering wheel. Maybe it's a rental, I whispered to myself, trying to steady my breath. But then I heard it, faint at first, then louder, music. Not the country songs Evan usually played when camping. It was loud, fast, electronic. Party music. And underneath it, laughter. High-pitched, feminine laughter. Something inside me snapped to attention. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned off the car and stepped out into the cold. The smell of smoke and alcohol drifted through the air. I could hear voices now, male and female, blending into a symphony of betrayal. I walked slowly, careful not to crunch the leaves beneath my boots. Every step forward felt like wading deeper into a nightmare I didn't want to see the end of. My fingers tightened around the basket handle until my knuckles went white. The closer I got, the clearer the voices became. And then, I heard Evan's laugh. That deep, easy laugh I used to love. The one that used to melt away my bad days. "She's too sweet to ever suspect anything," he said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Grace? She probably thinks I'm out here catching fish, not having the best weekend of my life." There was more laughter, followed by a woman's voice. "She sounds boring." My heart stopped. I froze, just a few feet from the cabin wall, listening. My throat went dry. I wanted to tell myself it was some awful misunderstanding, that maybe they were talking about someone else. But then I heard him again, my husband, say something that shattered whatever illusion I had left. "She's too dumb to notice anything. Once I get that house in my name, I'll dump her." My whole body went numb. It was like the air had been sucked out of the forest. I felt my chest tighten, my vision blur. The man I had trusted with my life, with my love, was planning to destroy me. I don't remember how long I stood there. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. The world around me faded until all I could hear was that one sentence repeating in my head. Too dumb to notice. A part of me wanted to scream, to storm inside, to throw the basket of food at his face and make him see what he'd done to me. But I didn't. Instead, I took a step closer, then another, until I reached the window. My reflection trembled in the glass as I looked inside, and there they were. Evan, Aaron, Lucas, Dylan, each with a girl draped over their lap, half-dressed, laughing like teenagers on spring break. Bottles scattered everywhere. Music pounding through a speaker. And Evan, my husband, his arm wrapped around a blonde woman in a red dress, kissing her neck while he poured himself another drink. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Something inside me froze, solid and unbreakable. I took out my phone. My hands were steady as I pressed record. The screen lit up, framing the scene in perfect, damning clarity. Click. Record. Silence. The irony wasn't lost on me. the woman who once believed love could fix everything was now filming the moment it died. When I finished, I turned off the phone, stepped back, and let the forest swallow the sounds of their laughter. The basket of food slipped from my hands, landing softly in the dirt. I walked back to my car without looking back once. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of their voices behind me. But inside, everything was quiet. Cold. Hollow. As I started the engine, I whispered the only thing that came to mind, the truth I wasn't ready to face yet. This is the last surprise he'll ever get from me. People used to say we were the perfect couple. Even strangers said it, at dinner parties, church gatherings, work events. You two are so good together, they'd say. You can just feel the love. I used to smile politely every time, my hand resting over Evan's as if to confirm what they believed. But deep down, I think I always knew that what people saw wasn't real. It was a picture frame with no photograph inside. Beautiful. Hollow. When we first met, Evan made me believe that life could finally be soft. He was charming in that steady, reliable way, the kind of man who carried groceries for old ladies and held the door open for everyone. He listened when I spoke, laughed at my small jokes, and looked at me like I was something he'd been waiting for all along. Back then, I was just starting out at the design firm. Life felt uncertain, a blur of bills and deadlines. And then came Evan, organized, calm, mature. He had a plan for everything, and I mistook that for safety. He made me feel like I didn't have to worry anymore. We got married a year later, in a small chapel surrounded by pines. It was snowing lightly that day, the kind of snow that looks like it's falling in slow motion. My father walked me down the aisle, my hands trembling from nerves. And when Evan smiled at me, I thought, this is what forever feels like. We moved into a cozy 2-story house on the edge of Duluth, the kind of place where winter sunlight filters through frosted windows and mornings smell like coffee and clean laundry. The first few months were peaceful. He'd kiss my forehead before leaving for work, text me during lunch just to ask what I was eating, and insist on making dinner together on Fridays. But love doesn't disappear overnight. It fades, quietly, almost politely. It started with small things. The way he stopped asking how my day went. The way he'd leave his plate on the table without saying thank you. The way he'd sigh when I talked about my projects at work. Then, the phone calls began, long ones, at odd hours. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and hear him whispering in the hallway. When I asked who it was, he said it was Brian from the office, talking about fishing trips or deadlines. His tone always sharp, defensive. At first, I believed him. Because believing him was easier than confronting the truth. Still, I tried to save what was left. I'd plan date nights, decorate the house for every season, bake his favorite desserts. I even joined him once on a fishing trip with his friends, something I didn't enjoy but did anyway, thinking it might bring us closer. But even there, I saw how he laughed louder with them than he ever did with me. Evan wasn't cruel, not in the way you might imagine. He didn't yell, didn't hit. His cruelty came in quieter forms, silence, indifference, the way his eyes passed over me like I wasn't even there. There were days I'd look at myself in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. My hair pulled up carelessly, dark circles under my eyes, a kind of dullness that no makeup could fix. I used to be full of color, hopeful, creative, alive. Now I was muted. My friends noticed. Maggie, my closest friend since college, once told me over coffee, "Grace, when's the last time you looked happy?" I smiled and said, "Happiness looks different after marriage." She didn't believe me. Neither did I. The turning point came about 6 months before that night at the cabin. I'd been cleaning out Evan's desk when I found an envelope addressed to him, from a bank I didn't recognize. When I opened it, it showed a withdrawal for a down payment on a private property outside of Duluth. I confronted him that night, my voice trembling, and he told me it was a surprise, something for us. I wanted to believe him. So I did. That's what love does to you sometimes, it makes you choose the softer lie over the hard truth. Still, small cracks began to spread. His weekend trips with the guys became more frequent. He stopped wearing his wedding ring, claiming it was uncomfortable when he fished. He changed his phone password, said his company required it. He even began criticizing me in ways that sounded casual but landed deep. "You've let yourself go a little, haven't you? You worry too much. You wouldn't understand how business works." Each comment chipped away at something inside me, until I stopped talking as much, stopped laughing as often. I became quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from exhaustion, and yet, I kept defending him to others. When Maggie asked why he missed our anniversary dinner, I said he was sick. When my sister mentioned he didn't seem affectionate anymore, I said he was just tired. I became an expert at making excuses for the man who stopped showing up. I think I stayed because leaving meant admitting I'd been wrong. That I'd chosen wrong. That all the effort, all the love, all the faith I had poured into him, it had all been wasted. So, I stayed. Until that day. Until I drove 3 hours through the forest, holding a basket full of love. only to find he'd been giving it to someone else. When people talk about heartbreak, they always describe it as sharp, like glass shattering. But that's not what it feels like. It's slower. It's the sound of a house settling, the quiet cracks forming in the foundation long before the collapse. I just hadn't heard them soon enough. It was supposed to be a surprise, something sweet, simple. Something to remind him that love still existed between us. Evan's birthday fell on a Saturday that year. And he had told me days earlier that he'd be gone for the weekend. Just a fishing trip with the guys, he said, kissing the top of my head while packing his gear. You know how it is, no phones, no stress, just beer and water. I had smiled, pretending to be supportive, though part of me wished he'd wanted to spend the day with me. Still, I told myself that men needed their space. That maybe when he came back, things would feel different, lighter. That morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the half-finished cup of coffee he'd left on the counter. His mug still smelled faintly of pine and aftershave. The kind of scent that once made me feel safe. Now it only made me ache. The idea came suddenly, like a flicker of light in the fog. What if I drove to the cabin? It wasn't far, maybe 3 hours north. I could bring lunch, maybe a homemade cake. I pictured his surprised smile, the laughter. The way he'd pull me into his arms and say, "You didn't have to do all this." For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. I spent the next few hours cooking, roast chicken glazed with honey and thyme, his favorite apple pie, a loaf of warm bread, and a bottle of wine we'd been saving for a special occasion. I told myself this was it. Maybe this could be the reset button our marriage needed. By noon, the sky had turned a dull gray, clouds thickening over the horizon. I packed the food carefully into the car, wrapped in blankets to keep warm. The drive to the cabin was long and winding, narrow roads curling through forests of birch and pine. Every few miles, the rain began to fall harder, tapping softly against the windshield. The deeper I drove, the quieter it became. The world felt suspended in a hushed stillness, only the rhythmic hum of tires on wet pavement and the occasional call of a crow cutting through the air. I remember smiling to myself, whispering, "He's going to love this." The GPS lost signal about an hour before I reached the cabin. But I knew the way. I'd been there once, 2 years ago, when we'd spent a weekend with his friends. I remembered the small wooden bridge over the creek, the hand-carved sign that said, Birch Hollow. When I finally turned onto the dirt path leading up the hill, I noticed something odd. There were cars parked outside the cabin, more than 4. One of them was a sleek red convertible I didn't recognize. I frowned, thinking maybe one of the guys had brought a friend, but then came the music, not the soft acoustic tunes Evan usually played when he fished, but loud, pulsing bass that didn't belong in the middle of the woods. My hands froze on the steering wheel. Laughter, high-pitched, feminine, drifted through the trees. For a moment, I sat there, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe they were just celebrating. Maybe someone's wife had joined. Maybe. But the unease grew heavier, pressing against my chest. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the damp air. The ground was soft from the rain, and the smell of wet pine filled my lungs. Each step toward the cabin felt slower, heavier, as if my body already knew what my mind refused to accept. The closer I got, the clearer everything became. Voices. Music. The sound of a bottle being opened. And then, a woman's laughter, followed by a man's voice I knew better than my own. Evan. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I crept closer, crouching behind the stack of firewood beside the porch, and peered through the window. What I saw made my stomach twist. Inside, the living room glowed with golden light from the fireplace. Evan sat on the couch, shirt unbuttoned, a glass of whiskey in one hand. A blonde woman, barely in her 20s, perched on his lap, tracing her fingers along his chest. Brian and Scott were nearby, laughing with 2 other girls. Kevin was half asleep on the recliner, a brunette leaning against him. The table was littered with empty bottles, poker chips, and tangled strings of fairy lights. It looked like a college party, wild, loud, unashamed, and right there, in the middle of it all, was my husband, the man who kissed me goodbye that morning and told me he loved me. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My body went cold, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every part of me screamed to run, to kick open the door, to scream his name until the walls shook. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it, but I managed to press record. Through the glass, I filmed everything, the laughter, the embraces, the lies made flesh. I zoomed in on Evan's face, capturing the smile that wasn't mine anymore. At one point, the blonde girl whispered something in his ear, and he laughed, a laugh I hadn't heard in months. I wondered if that was the real him, the version I'd never known. My throat burned, my vision blurred, but I stayed until I couldn't bear it anymore. I turned off the camera and backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. When I reached the car, the rain had turned into a steady downpour. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, Gasping for air, I couldn't seem to find. The basket of food sat on the passenger seat, still warm, untouched. The smell of roasted chicken and apple pie filled the car, sickly sweet now, like a cruel joke. I don't remember driving home. Only the blur of headlights on wet roads, the sound of thunder in the distance, and the single thought that kept repeating in my head: he made a choice. So now I have to make mine. I drove home that night with the wipers beating like a frantic heartbeat against the windshield. The road shimmered under the rain, and the world blurred into streaks of gray and gold. Everything outside looked drowned, trees bending under the storm, puddles swallowing light, but nothing drowned louder than the noise in my head. Every mile I drove, I replayed the sound of that woman's laugh. The way Evan's hand rested on her thigh. The way he smiled, relaxed, unguarded. I kept thinking, he didn't even look guilty. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. The porch light glowed faintly. And our home, the one I'd decorated with love, looked almost unfamiliar. Like it was just a set, waiting for actors to come back and pretend they cared. I sat there for a long time before I went inside. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door. The house smelled like lavender and lemon from the candle I'd lit that morning. And for a moment, that scent felt like an insult. I placed the basket of food on the kitchen counter, unwrapped it, and looked at the still warm pie. I had baked it with love, each slice carved with trust, and now, it just sat there, useless. A symbol of everything I had lost without even realizing it. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and watched the video again. The images flickered across the screen, blurry, grainy, but enough. Evan's face. The laughter. The women. It was all there, undeniable. Some people, when they find out they've been betrayed, scream, throw things, call their friends, drown in tears. I didn't. I went still. Completely, frighteningly still. That's when I realized something had shifted. For years, I'd been the quiet one in our marriage, the peacekeeper, the forgiver, the one who softened every argument with, maybe he didn't mean it. But that night, silence became my weapon. I transferred the video files to my laptop, backed them up to an external drive, then uploaded a copy to a private cloud. My hands moved automatically, steady and precise, like I was cataloging the remains of something sacred. When the files were safe, I began searching online. The girls' faces from the video burned into my memory. It didn't take long. Social media has a way of revealing everything if you look close enough. One was tagged in photos at a downtown bar, another worked at a nearby gym. And the blonde, the one on Evan's lap, had a public profile filled with selfies taken in front of the same red convertible I'd seen outside the cabin. Her name was Christina Lawson, 22, marketing intern. She had once commented under one of Evan's old posts, "You always make things more fun." The date? 3 months before our anniversary. I felt my jaw tighten. Every lie he had told me, every "I'm working late" and "don't wait up," suddenly found its place in the timeline of betrayal. By 2 a.m. I had everything I needed: video evidence, screenshots, faces, dates, and even comments linking the others, Brian, Scott, and Kevin, to their respective girlfriends. It was like unraveling a web woven by cowards, and I wasn't going to scream. I was going to make sure every thread broke exactly where I pulled it. Before heading to bed, I sent one message to my best friend, Maggie. I found out something tonight. It's bad. Maggie, what happened? Are you safe? Yes. I just need time. And maybe your legal brain soon. Her reply came quickly. Maggie, whatever it is, I've got you. Those words made my eyes sting. But I didn't cry. Not yet. When I finally lay down, the bed felt enormous, empty, like a sea of white sheets and unspoken things. I turned to Evan's side, still faintly warm from that morning, and whispered into the dark, "You'll never see me coming." Sleep didn't come easily. My dreams were fragments: the blonde's laugh, Evan's smirk, the smell of whiskey, the rain. I woke before sunrise, my body stiff, my throat dry. The sky outside was a dull silver, and the air tasted like cold iron. I made coffee, strong and bitter, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the wall. That was when it hit me, not the pain, but the realization. I had been so careful to build my life around him that I'd forgotten to build a life for myself. I thought back to the woman I used to be, the one who dreamed of opening her own design studio, who painted late at night, who believed in love as something pure. Somewhere along the way, I'd traded her for someone smaller, quieter, more afraid of being alone than being unloved. No more. By noon, I had a plan. Step 1, pretend nothing happened. Step 2, let him hang himself with his own lies. Step 3, choose the moment to strike. When Maggie came by later that day, I showed her the footage. She watched it in silence, her jaw tightening. When the video ended, she looked at me and said quietly, "Grace, this isn't just cheating. This is humiliation. And you're handling it like a chess player." I smiled faintly. That's the point. Together, we discussed legal options. Maggie warned me to stay calm. If you confront him now, he'll just deny it and twist the story. She was right. Evan had always been good at playing the victim. I needed him to believe I was still the same naive wife who adored him. That evening, I cooked dinner as usual: steak, mashed potatoes, his favorite. I even texted him, "Hope you're having fun. Can't wait to hear all about your trip." He replied hours later, "It's great. The guys say hi. Miss you." I stared at the screen and almost laughed. When he walked through the door the next evening, smelling faintly of smoke and cologne, I greeted him with a smile. He looked tired, but smug, like someone who'd just gotten away with a crime. "How was the trip?" I asked. "Good," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. "Caught a few big ones." "Really?" I handed him a plate. "Maybe next time I'll come along." He froze for a second, just a flicker, then laughed. "You'd get bored." I laughed too. But inside, something dark and steady whispered, "No, Evan. You're the one who's about to get bored of lying." That night, when he fell asleep, I stood by the window, looking out at the faint reflection of my face in the glass. The rain had stopped, and the moon hung pale above the trees. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt focused, sharp, ready, and for the first time since that night at the cabin, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I woke up the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The kind of clarity that comes after a storm, when everything that's been broken lies perfectly visible on the ground. You can finally see what's real, what's left. Evan was still asleep beside me, breathing heavily, his hand resting carelessly on my pillow. I watched him for a moment, memorizing the face I used to love. It didn't make me angry anymore. It just looked empty. I slipped out of bed, made myself coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. The laptop glowed faintly in the early light, and my plan unfolded in front of me: precise, deliberate, unstoppable. Step 1, create the group. Step 2, invite the right people. Step 3, let the truth speak for itself. I opened a new group chat and named it Our Fishermen. The irony made me almost smile. Then I began adding people, carefully, one by one. First, the wives: Emily Harris, Brian's wife; Heather Cooper, Scott's wife; Claire Mason, Kevin's wife, all three women I'd met before at summer barbecues and office events. We'd laughed together, shared recipes, talked about weekend plans, and none of us knew we were married to liars. Then came the girlfriends, the women from the video: Christina Lawson, Lara Jones, Helena Torres, Dasha Petrov. Their names sat there, glowing coldly on my screen. 8 women. 4 men. One secret. I took a sip of coffee, uploaded the video file, and watched the progress bar fill, slowly, almost painfully. Like a fuse burning toward an explosion. When it reached 100%, I hit send. No message. No caption. No warning, just the truth. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The group was silent. Then the notifications began to pour in, one after another, like firecrackers. Emily: "What the hell is this?" Heather: "Wait, that's Scott?" Claire: "Oh my god. I can't breathe." Then the others joined. Christina: "Who sent this?" Lara: "This has to be fake." Alina: "Delete this right now." Someone tried to remove the video. Too late. It had already been viewed, downloaded, shared. The damage was done. I sat there watching it unfold, chaos, disbelief, rage, all spilling out on my screen. The wives began to turn on the girlfriends on the men trying to call them, deny everything, spin the narrative. Within minutes, the thread became a battlefield of crying emojis, curse words, and broken hearts, and through it all, I said nothing, just sat there, sipping my coffee, feeling the heat of the cup against my palms, the cool satisfaction of justice spreading through my veins. I didn't need to say a word. The truth was speaking fluently. At 9:17 a.m., my phone started buzzing, Evan calling. I let it ring. Then again. And again. When I finally answered, his voice was frantic. "Grace. What the hell is going on?" "Brian just called me," he said. "His wife." I cut him off, my tone calm and cold. "I know everything, Evan." Silence. Then a shaky laugh. "Come on, babe. This is crazy. Someone's setting us up." I let him talk. Let him dig the hole deeper. I was with the guys, that's all. Maybe some girls showed up, but nothing happened. "You know me." "Oh, I do," I said softly. "Better than you think." Before he could respond, I hung up. Then, for the first time since that night in the cabin, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was done. By noon, the scandal had spread beyond our small circle. Brian's wife posted screenshots online. Heather drove to Scott's workplace and threw his wedding ring at him in front of his colleagues. Claire locked Kevin out of their house. I didn't plan for it to go viral. But truth has a way of finding its audience. When Evan finally came home that evening, his eyes were red and wild. He slammed the door and shouted, "What did you do?" I stayed seated on the couch, calm, legs crossed, a glass of wine in my hand. "What do you mean?" "Don't play stupid, Grace. You've ruined everything." I tilted my head. "No, Evan. You did that yourself. I just gave it a name." He stared at me, lost, as if trying to understand the person sitting in front of him. Maybe for the first time, he realized I wasn't afraid anymore. He tried to touch my arm. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. My voice didn't shake. "You don't get to touch me, not after this." His anger cracked, replaced by desperation. "I made a mistake, okay? It didn't mean anything. You're my wife. We can fix this." I set my glass down gently and looked him in the eye. "Fix it? You ended it, Evan. I'm just giving it the name it deserves." He froze, because those were his own words. Ones he'd said months ago, during an argument, when I'd asked him if we were okay. Back then, he'd shrugged and said, "Maybe things just end. We don't have to name it." Now, I did that. He tried again, whispering, "Grace, please." But I'd already picked up my phone. The group chat was still active, messages exploding across the screen. I turned it toward him. "Say hi to everyone," I said quietly, his face drained of color. The names were all there, glowing like ghosts of his lies. He saw the video thumbnail, his own face smiling up from the screen. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands, whispering, "Oh God." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the world felt eerily still. Then I stood, walked to the bedroom, and came back holding my wedding ring. I placed it gently on the table beside him. "You don't need to call me anymore," I said. "The lawyers will." Then I walked upstairs, closed the door, and for the first time in years, slept soundly. The day I left wasn't loud. There were no slammed doors, no shouting, no dramatic farewells. Just quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after a fire, when all that's left is smoke curling in the air. Evan was still asleep when I packed. He had spent the last few nights pacing, begging, crying, promising he would change. I watched him crumble, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of losing what he thought he owned. I folded my clothes neatly, one by one, placing them in the same suitcase I had used on our honeymoon. The irony didn't escape me. The same suitcase that once held new dresses and beach sandals now held my escape. When I closed the last zipper, I walked to his side of the bed. His face looked older, heavier, as if the weight of his own lies had finally settled. I wanted to feel something, anger, pity, nostalgia, but I didn't. I felt nothing. I left the house key on the nightstand beside him and whispered, "Goodbye." Then I walked out the door. The morning air was sharp and cold. My breath turned to mist as I stepped off the porch, suitcase rolling softly behind me. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. Maggie picked me up a few blocks away. She didn't ask questions, she just drove. I stared out the window as the familiar streets faded behind us, replaced by open roads and winter light. We stopped at her apartment downtown, small, warm, smelling of coffee and cinnamon. It became my temporary home. She made me tea and said softly, "You did it, Grace." "I guess I did." "It feels weird, doesn't it? Freedom." I nodded. "It doesn't feel real yet." That night, after Maggie went to bed, I stood by the window, looking at the city lights. I realized I wasn't crying. Not even close. I'd already done my grieving long before that day, in the silence, in the sleepless nights, in every little moment I'd been dismissed, ignored, unseen. This was something else. This was peace. In the weeks that followed, things moved quickly. Maggie connected me with a divorce attorney, calm, efficient, kind. The process was surprisingly smooth. The evidence I had gathered left no room for argument. Evan's lawyer tried to negotiate, but there was nothing left to negotiate with. I kept the house. The car. My savings. Everything in my name. Evan lost more than just me. He lost his friends, too. Brian's wife, Heather, and Claire all filed for divorce within the same week. The entire group imploded. Rumors spread fast in our town. The fishing club, as they called themselves, became a joke. Their pictures disappeared from social media, their reputations shredded in the same public space where they'd once shown off their smiles. I didn't post a thing. I didn't even comment. I just watched. Quietly, there was a strange satisfaction in my restraint. Because revenge, I realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about letting people destroy themselves, while you walk away clean. A month later, I went back to my job at the design firm. The first day back felt surreal. Everyone knew something had happened, but no one dared to ask. My boss simply said, "It's good to have you back, Grace," and handed me a new project, redesigning a small lakeside inn. I threw myself into it, working late into the evenings. Sketching, painting color palettes, touching textures. Every brushstroke felt like a piece of myself returning. When the project was finally done, I visited the inn to see it completed. It overlooked a quiet lake, still, glassy, reflecting the trees like a mirror. As I stood on the balcony, wind brushing my hair, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. Later that night, Maggie and I celebrated with pizza and cheap wine. She raised her glass and said, "To starting over." I smiled. "To never settling again." We laughed, but deep inside, I knew she was right. I wasn't the same woman anymore. The one who once believed love could fix everything, she was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, quieter in a different way, not the silence of submission. The silence of peace. Weeks turned into months. I moved into a small apartment near the city, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I decorated it slowly, white curtains, warm lights, a small shelf filled with books I'd once loved but stopped reading. Every morning, I'd wake up, make coffee, and sit by the window. Sometimes, I'd watch couples walking by and wonder if I'd ever fall in love again. Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. Either way, it didn't matter, because love wasn't supposed to hurt. And I finally understood that being alone wasn't loneliness, it was liberation. Evan tried to reach out once more. He left a voicemail, his voice trembling. "I miss you, Grace. I made a mistake. I still love you." I deleted it without listening to the end. He wasn't wrong. He had made a mistake, but not just one. He'd mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for blindness, and now he had to live with that. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn morning, I drove past our old neighborhood. The leaves were turning golden red, the same way they had when we first moved in. Out of curiosity, I slowed down near the house. It was for sale. The yard unkempt, the curtains drawn. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. As I turned back toward the city, sunlight spilled through the clouds, warm, golden, forgiving. That night, I stood on my balcony, holding a cup of tea. The city below was alive, lights flickering, laughter echoing from a nearby cafe. I breathed deeply, feeling the cold air fill my lungs, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not love. Not closure. Not an apology, just peace. And as I watched the night settle around me, I whispered to myself, softly, almost like a prayer, for the first time, the quiet doesn't feel empty. It feels like home. It's strange how silence can change its meaning. Once, it used to terrify me. The quiet in our house was the kind that followed disappointment, heavy, tense, filled with unspoken words. But now, silence feels different. Softer. Lighter. Like a sigh of relief after holding your breath for too long. It's been a year since the divorce was finalized. A year since I walked away from the woman I used to be, the one who loved too gently, who trusted too easily, who kept giving until there was nothing left. I live alone now. In a small apartment near the harbor. From my balcony, I can see the lake stretching out toward the horizon, silver in the morning and golden by sunset. The sound of seagulls has replaced the sound of Evan's voice. The air smells of salt and freedom. Most mornings, I wake up early, make a pot of coffee, and sit by the window watching the light change. It's funny how something so ordinary, the sun rising, can feel like a small miracle when you've survived the dark. People ask me sometimes if I miss him. If I ever think about what we had, and the truth is, yes, sometimes I do. Not because I want him back, but because remembering helps me see how far I've come. I used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that to love someone was to give everything, even when they gave nothing back. But love shouldn't feel like erasure. It shouldn't make you smaller. It should make you more. I think of that night often, the one at the cabin, the laughter behind the walls, the moment my world cracked open. I used to see it as the worst night of my life. Now I see it as the night I woke up. Pain, as it turns out, is a great teacher. It strips you down until there's nothing left but the truth. After everything that happened, people expected me to be bitter, angry. Some even called me cold for not destroying him further. For not turning his life into the wreck he tried to make of mine. But that's not who I am. Revenge doesn't heal you, it just keeps you tied to the person who hurt you. What I wanted wasn't vengeance. It was freedom, and I have it now. Sometimes I run into people who knew us, old neighbors, coworkers, mutual friends. They still look at me with that mix of pity and curiosity. "You seem happy," they say, like it's a surprise. I just smile. Because I am. I've rebuilt myself piece by piece. I started painting again, small canvases at first, mostly landscapes, always with light somewhere in them. My art teacher once told me, every artist paints what they need. I guess I've been painting peace. Maggie still visits every week. She brings wine and too many opinions about my love life. I laugh more now. Real laughter, not the polite kind I used to give to fill silence. And sometimes, when I walk along the harbor, I see couples holding hands, whispering, promising forever. I don't feel envy anymore. Just a quiet hope that they'll protect what they have, and that if they ever lose it, they'll know how to stand again, because that's what love should do, not save you, but remind you that you can save yourself. One morning last week, I visited the old house. I don't know why, maybe curiosity, maybe closure. It was empty, up for sale. the front yard overgrown with weeds. The "for sale" sign creaked softly in the wind. I walked up the porch steps and stood there, looking at the door I used to call home. Once, I had walked through that door carrying flowers, groceries, laughter. Once, I had walked out of it in tears. Now, I stood there in silence, then smiled, not out of sadness, but gratitude, because that door wasn't just an ending. It was also the beginning of everything that came after. Before leaving, I took the old key from my pocket, the one I'd never thrown away, and placed it gently under the welcome mat. Then I whispered, "Thank you for teaching me what love isn't." As I turned to go, a soft breeze moved through the trees, scattering the last of the autumn leaves across the porch. The air felt alive, like the world itself was exhaling. When I reached my car, the first light of dawn was breaking across the sky, pale gold spilling over the horizon. I rolled down the window, letting the cold air rush in, and for a moment, I just breathed. No music. No noise. Just breath, and the hum of the road beneath me. That's when I realized, freedom doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, on a cold morning, with a suitcase in your trunk and peace in your heart, and maybe that's all I ever needed. Not revenge. Not closure. Just peace. So I drove on, the sunrise reflecting in the rearview mirror, and whispered to myself, softly, but certain, I crossed the same threshold again. But this time, I walked into freedom, not betrayal.